The service elevator hummed with the familiar clatter of aging gears, carrying with it the sharp bite of bleach layered beneath the ghost of someone's reheated lunch. All around me, waiters in immaculate white shirts moved with the discipline of a trained regiment, balancing trays, ferrying ice buckets, exchanging hushed directives, none of them pausing to take notice of the composed woman in an understated black Chanel dress. Not one of them suspected she was the person whose signature appeared on their employment contracts. First time up in the penthouse, a cheerful young server asked, catching me mid-pause and reading it as apprehension. Something like that, I told him, smoothing the modest pearl necklace at my collarbone, the very same strand I'd worn the previous year while finalizing the acquisition that brought this hotel under my company's umbrella. He dropped his voice as though sharing a state secret. Watch yourself around the Ashworths. The daughters already reduced 3 people to tears tonight. My future daughter-in-law. Miss Victoria Ashworth, the same Victoria whose engagement to self-made investment banker Michael Chin had been plastered across every glossy publication, complete with breathless coverage of the elite guest list and the illustrious Ashworth lineage. Curiously, every article seemed to misplace one minor detail: the groom's inconveniently self-made mother. The kitchen, when I entered it, was orchestrated chaos, steam erupting in great hisses, metal surfaces ringing, overlapping voices competing for dominance. At the center stood Victoria like a commander dressed in couture, her gown catching the fluorescent light, its price tag exceeding my entire first year's earnings before I'd founded my first company. No, 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 she snapped, her gaze cutting into a visibly rattled pastry chef. These macarons are pink. The palette calls for rose gold. The whole aesthetic is destroyed. I cleared my throat. Is there a problem? My tone was deliberately measured, gentle enough to seem courteous, pointed enough to make her spin around. She turned, all lacquered composure and barely concealed irritation. Who are you? Where's your uniform? Jessica Chin. Michael's mother. Recognition crossed her polished features, followed by the faintest shadow of disdain. Right. Michael mentioned you might come early to help. Her eyes traveled briefly over my outfit before settling into a sculpted smile. The staff entrance was meant to take you directly to the back. It did, I replied pleasantly, savoring her momentary bewilderment. Though I assumed I'd be greeting guests beside my son, not the silverware. At that precise moment, a tall, elegant figure swept in trailing, expensive perfume and a sense of entitlement, Margaret Ashworth. The society press adored her, a perennial presence at charity galas, always positioned beside her husband's considerable fortune in carefully curated photographs. Vicky, darling, guests are beginning to arrive. Then her gaze located me, dissecting and deliberate. And this must be Michael's mother. The pause that followed had the quiet precision of a blade dipped in honey. Mrs. Ashworth, I said, perfectly serene. Stunning venue. The renovation has done remarkable things for the original architecture. Yes, well, she replied with a dismissive flutter of bejeweled fingers. The new ownership seems to have spent generously, though I must say I preferred the previous management. They had a certain understanding of our expectations. I allowed myself a quiet smile, recalling exactly how desperately that previous management had implored me to rescue their failing property, looking straight past the composed Asian woman seated across the boardroom table, entirely unaware she would be signing the deed before the lunch break. Mother, Victoria interjected with deliberate sweetness. Shouldn't we revisit the seating arrangements, given certain circumstances? Her mother's responding smile was frost and silk. Of course. Mrs. Chin, we've arranged a very comfortable spot for you in the private dining room with the rest of the staff. You'll find it far more relaxed. How considerate, I murmured. Casting a glance at my wristwatch, a discreet Patek Philippe whose value alone could have settled their entire event bill, with room to spare. Mom. Michael's voice cut through the kitchen noise as he appeared, looking every bit the polished investment banker, perfect tie, controlled expression, though I still saw traces of the nervous young man I'd quietly provided startup capital to on his 21st birthday. Darling. Victoria's demeanor shifted instantly. I was just helping your mother find her seat. In the kitchen, Vic, he asked, his voice level. We've already discussed this. It's fine, I said, touching his sleeve before he could press further. I'm perfectly comfortable here. Margaret's posture stiffened. We simply thought, given your background, something less formal would suit you better. A quiet flicker of amusement moved through me. Background. Such a tidy little word for dressing up condescension. Michael caught my eye and recognized the expression that had once prompted entire boardrooms of executives to reconsider their approach. He said nothing. Wisely. I think, I said softly, we should let the guests take priority. They're waiting. On cue, the elevator doors parted and released a polished stream of New York society, perfume, diamonds, bright laughter, and ambition worn like jewelry. Margaret and Victoria glided forward, their rehearsed smiles a flawless performance that never quite climbed to their eyes. Mom, Michael murmured beside me, you don't have to tolerate this. One word from you and do what? I straightened his tie. Tell them that the woman they're trying so hard to render invisible actually owns the building? I smiled. Where's the entertainment in that? He struggled to suppress a grin. You're enjoying yourself, aren't you? Enormously, I whispered. Now go be the devoted future son-in-law. As the party grew around glittering chandeliers and the soft percussion of applause, I stationed myself near the doorway and observed. Theodore Ashworth, the family patriarch, held court at the center of a cluster of old money, pontificating too loudly about investments he barely grasped. Margaret navigated the crowd like a social traffic controller, steering attractive women firmly away from her daughter's fiancé. Victoria drifted from one conversation to the next, her laughter a fraction too bright, her eyes darting periodically toward the kitchen as though she feared her unwanted mother-in-law might slip the leash. More champagne, ma'am? The same kind young server materialized at my elbow, tray balanced with practiced ease. Thank you, Claire, I said, reading her name tag. How long have you been here? 3 years, she replied. Though we're all a bit anxious about what the new owners might change. Change can be a good thing, I said. Better benefits, for instance. Firmer policies against guests mistreating staff. She blinked. Oh, you sound like you've heard something. You might say that, I replied. Just then, Theodore's baritone sliced through the ambient music. And where's the groom's mother hiding? Surely she isn't too intimidated to join the party. The chatter dissolved. Victoria's smile locked in place. Margaret went pale. I stepped out of the shadows, champagne flute in hand. Not at all, Mr. Ashworth, I said pleasantly. I was simply admiring your daughter's exceptional taste in venues. There you are. He was flushed from too much expensive scotch. Tell me, what do you make of all this grandeur? Quite a step up from your usual surroundings, I'd imagine. The ensuing silence was almost theatrical. Even Michael held steady, his eyes carrying the particular recognition of someone who'd witnessed corporate devastation begin with that exact expression on my face. Actually, I said, taking a slow, measured sip, I find the penthouse quite agreeable. Though the East Wing renovation is running several weeks behind, something to do with permit delays, if I'm not mistaken. His grin faltered. How on earth would you know that? The same way I know about the unresolved health code violations your caterer hasn't disclosed, I said gently. The overtime dispute in the kitchen, or the fact that your last payment to this hotel was returned. The room seemed to draw a single collective breath. Margaret stepped forward, visibly shaken. Who exactly are you? I smiled, every trace of corporate authority channeled into absolute quiet composure. Just the help, Mrs. Ashworth, though some know me as Jessica Chen, CEO of Global Hospitality Holdings. I tilted my glass slightly in her direction. But tonight, you may simply call me your new landlord. The crystal slipped from her fingers and exploded against the marble floor, the sound ringing out with perfect clarity through the stunned room. Victoria's complexion went the color of fresh snow. Margaret looked genuinely unwell. Theodore's mouth worked open and shut like a man who had forgotten how speech functioned. That's impossible. Global hospitality belongs to JC Holdings. Indeed, I said smoothly. JC Holdings. Jessica Chin Holdings. I do appreciate a degree of anonymity. It tends to bring out people's authentic selves. Michael moved closer now, a restrained grin pulling at the corner of his mouth. Should I mention the other properties, Mom? The country club, perhaps? Or the marina where a certain yacht is kept? Michael. Victoria's voice fractured. You knew? You knew this entire time? Of course he knew, I said, my tone silk soft but entirely unsparing. Though I must say, watching you attempt to tuck his embarrassing mother away in the kitchen has been rather illuminating, particularly considering your Windsor Club membership renewal falls due next month. Margaret seized her husband's arm. Theodore, do something. Yes, Theodore, I echoed, allowing myself a moment of undisguised satisfaction. Do something. Perhaps begin by accounting for why your last 3 payments to this hotel were declined. Or shall we move directly to the more creative elements of your bookkeeping? Phones were already raised, discreetly capturing everything. Tomorrow's gossip columns would have material to last the season. You can't simply, Theodore began. Actually, I can, I said. It's my hotel. I turned to Claire. Please inform the kitchen that all staff will receive double pay this evening, along with a bonus for their patience with tonight's hosts. Her startled smile was the finest moment of the night. Victoria's composure finally broke, mascara threatening the corners of her eyes. Michael, please. I didn't know. I swear. Michael's expression hardened into something deliberate. Didn't know what? That you'd have looked down on my mother if she'd stayed poor? That you'd only treat her with dignity once you discovered she was wealthy? That's not better, Vic. That's worse. Perhaps, I said, setting my empty glass on a passing tray, this conversation deserves a more private setting, unless you'd prefer to keep trending online. The Ashworths followed, utterly diminished, into the private dining room, the very one they had so generously designated for me among the staff. That irony alone made the entire evening worthwhile. The doors closed. Silence settled heavily. What is it you want? Theodore demanded, his voice rough at the edges. Money? A board seat. I laughed, a sound that was equal parts polished and precise. Mr. Ashworth, I hold controlling interest in 3 hotel chains, 2 airlines, and the very country club you enjoy name-dropping at dinner parties. What exactly do you imagine you could offer me? Margaret's composed facade finally gave way entirely, her voice unsteady. Then why? Why go through all of this? Why let us make fools of ourselves? Because you needed to understand something about judgment, I said, meeting Victoria's eyes, about mistaking wealth for worth. I love Michael, Victoria said quietly. This was never about money. I raised an eyebrow. Then you would have proudly introduced his immigrant mother to your circle of friends. Posted photographs with the woman who worked 3 jobs to put him through school. Seated the woman he's most proud of at the head table. She looked away. Her silence answered everything. The irony, Michael said quietly, is that Mom hasn't cleaned a hotel room in 20 years. But if she had, I would still be proud to call her my mother. She taught me that real class has nothing to do with financial standing and everything to do with how you treat other human beings. Theodore sank into a chair, all the color drained from his face. Every membership renewal, every hotel account will be reviewed, I continued, along with every documented interaction your family has had with my staff. I take employee welfare very seriously, Mr. Ashworth. We can explain, Margaret started. I'm certain you can. You can explain why you bounce checks while spending extravagantly on designer wardrobes. Why you berate people in service roles while presenting yourselves publicly as philanthropists. I glanced at my watch. You have 2 options. I announce the immediate termination of your memberships and privileges across all my properties, publicly tonight. Or, Victoria whispered. You spend the next year demonstrating that you're capable of change. Starting tonight. Go back into that room and personally apologize to every staff member you've mistreated. Establish a foundation with your own funds, not mine, to support education for people in the service industry. Proof that what happened here tonight taught you something beyond the fact that you underestimated the wrong woman. Michael stepped forward. And my engagement? I watched Victoria's expression collapse. For the first time all evening, something genuine broke through the lacquered surface. That, I said softly, is entirely between you and the woman who decided his mother wasn't worthy of a seat at her table. Victoria surprised me then. She straightened her spine, composed herself, and looked directly at Michael. I don't deserve you. Either of you. But if you'll allow me, I want to earn your respect, starting with going back into that kitchen I was so ashamed of. Margaret inhaled sharply. Victoria. No, Mother. Victoria's voice had found a new steadiness. We have been wrong. Profoundly wrong. And I intend to make it right. I studied her face and saw, perhaps for the first time that evening, something entirely unperformed. Shall we return to the party then? I believe you have a number of apologies to begin. As the Ashworths filed out, thoroughly humbled, Michael caught my arm. You knew this would happen. You let them dig the hole themselves. Sometimes, I said, adjusting his tie one final time, people need to see themselves honestly before they can become something better. Your Victoria may have more in her than we thought. If she proves it, he said. If she proves it, I agreed. Now, shall we go watch the Ashworth apology tour? What unfolded over the next hour surpassed anything I might have choreographed in a boardroom. Victoria, her couture gown now covered by a borrowed kitchen apron, worked alongside the very staff she'd reduced to tears hours before. Margaret Ashworth, looking faintly dazed, personally offered hors d'oeuvres to guests who could barely conceal their astonishment. And Theodore, his complexion still ash-gray, wrote personal checks to cover the returned payments, with considerable additional amounts attached. Your mother, an elderly socialite murmured to Michael, is an absolute marvel. Society has wanted to take the Ashworths down a peg for years. It was Claire, however, who captured the true weight of the moment. She approached me quietly, something almost tentative in her manner. Mrs. Chin, the staff wanted you to know. We've worked hundreds of these events, served some of the most powerful people in this city. You're the first who ever looked at us like we were people. I touched her arm gently. That's because I've stood where you're standing. 25 years ago, I was cleaning these very rooms while working toward my business degree. Never let anyone diminish you because of how you earn your living. Victoria appeared beside us, her carefully arranged hair now slightly undone, the gloss of the evening worn off in the best possible way. I've been terrible, haven't I? Recognizing it is where it begins, I said. What you do with that recognition is what actually matters. She squared her shoulders. I want to start by funding scholarships for staff members pursuing further education. If Michael would help me structure it properly, I saw him watching from across the room, his expression thoughtful. Perhaps his instincts had not been entirely off. First, I said, you'll spend a full month working in this hotel. Not playing at the idea for an evening, but genuinely working early starts, late finishes, difficult guests. After that, we discussed scholarships. To her credit, she didn't flinch. When do I start? Tomorrow. 5 in the morning. Wear sensible shoes. As Victoria went to break the news to her shell-shocked parents, Michael fell into step beside me. You're actually going to have her work as hotel staff. I'm going to give her the education she clearly needs, I said, watching Margaret Ashworth awkwardly navigate a water pitcher. Sometimes the only path to genuine empathy runs straight through someone else's shoes. And her parents will have their own lessons, beginning with a thorough audit of every financial dealing they've had with my properties. Return checks, I suspect, are only the opening chapter. The party wound toward its close. Guests departed carrying enough material to fuel the society pages for weeks. Victoria had exchanged her designer heels for borrowed flats from the kitchen, and her immaculate hands showed the faint evidence of real work for possibly the first time in her life. She approached Michael and me, Her chin lifted despite the smudged mascara. Mrs. Chin, I know I haven't earned another chance. But I promise you, I'm going to deserve a place in your family, not because of what you own or who you are, but because your son deserves someone who understands what genuinely matters. I studied her face and found something beneath the ruined makeup that looked unmistakably like resolve. You know, Victoria, 25 years ago, another prominent family looked down at me, decided I wasn't fit for their world. What became of them? I acquired their company, rebuilt it under a different name, and made it the cornerstone of everything I've built since. I smiled. More importantly, I never let it make me like them. Remember that when the training feels difficult. Michael drew me aside as the last guests gathered their things. Did you plan all of it? Letting them believe you were staff the whole time. The surest way to understand someone's character, I said, is to let them believe they hold the advantage. I touched his face briefly. Your Victoria may yet surprise us both. She's the first Ashworth to voluntarily offer to actually work. And if she falls short, at least she'll fall short reaching for something better. I looked back at the hotel, remembering, with quiet fullness, the young woman who had once mopped these floors while imagining the day she might own them. You know, son, I said, the finest revenge is rarely about showing people how far you've risen. It's about showing them why they were wrong to look down in the first place. Michael pulled me into a long embrace. You're extraordinary, Mom. Thank you for letting me learn this alongside them. That's what mothers do, I said simply. We sort out the messes, deliver the hard lessons, and occasionally acquire a hotel chain or two. Now, shall we go to dinner? I know a charming little place. I bought it last week.